Hello, today we're going to talk about the Mughals. This is another one of these Muslim kingdoms or empires that we want to talk about. Continuing on from our discussion before of the Ottomans, the Mughals are actually the ones who bring Islam into India and bring in Islamic control into India. They move into India between the 16th and the 18th century, so that's the 1500s through the 1700s. They control India. They come to India from the north, really coming from the area we might call today Iran or Persia. And so they have connections with the Safavids who are there. We mentioned them before. And they move into India from the north. They bring Islam with them. And then this becomes the way in which Islam gets into India. Today, the modern country of India is actually has two other countries that used to be part of India. One is Pakistan, and the other is Bangladesh. Those are both Muslim areas that actually broke off from India, which is Hindu, in the mid 20th century, 1949, in that time period. And they become at first East and West Pakistan, and then Pakistan and Bangladesh. So at any rate, this is how they get there. This is how the Muslims get there. Here is a map of India. It's a very large area, probably much larger than what most, probably Americans anyway, think about it. It's a subcontinent. Notice that up to the north it is bordered by very large mountains. The Himalayas, for example, here to Tibet. And very mountainous here into Afghanistan. And then notice near it here is Persia. Well, it's from this area, from Persia in this way, and through Afghanistan, through the Khyber Pass, that the Mughals will come down into the northwest part of India and will eventually expand their territory. Here you see this purple line, which shows you the limits of the Mughal empire at the death of Akbar in 1605, and then this green line way down here at the bottom is the extent of the empire about 1700. So they become to control basically all of India, or almost all of India. Well, we can begin this discussion of the Mughals with this guy. His name is Babur, 1483 to 1530. His father was related to Tamerlane, the guy that we talked about who attacked the Turks, and his mother was related to Genghis Khan. So he actually comes from a lot of background of conquerors and powerful military rulers, and he too becomes a powerful military ruler, Babur. He moves from Kabul, that would be in Afghanistan area. He comes down through the Khyber Pass, which is the main way you can enter into India from the north through the mountains, and it's still the way people come through still today. He enters into India then in 1504. 1504. You can see he's just about 21 years old, and he's quite ambitious entering into this area. This is usually considered to be the beginning point then of the Mughal Empire, 1504, under the leadership of Babur. So here's another drawing of Babur. You see him on horseback. They were quite adept, the Mughals, at using horses in battle and military fashion. He comes into the area saying he's going to help the people there, help failing powers that are there. So you have to be careful when people say they want to come and help you. Sometimes they don't really want to help you. They want to help themselves, and this is a good opportunity for them to get their foot in the door, get their nose in the tent, however you want to call it. And then, of course, they don't leave. They end up taking over because they're very adept fighters on horseback. They use a bow and arrow. They use other weapons like that. But they also have more advanced weaponry, And this is going to be true of the Ottomans and of the Safavids and of the Mughals. They will have, before most of the people they are attacking, they will have gunpowder before the other powers do. They use this to their advantage because they have artillery, they have guns, and so forth. They also use, of course, as we mentioned, horses, cavalry units. They are very adept at using that, and they use elephants. It's interesting because the use of elephants in military activities, of course, you find it in this area around India and to the north. Alexander the Great first encountered elephants in battle there. Later on, of course, the Hellenistic rulers will use them. The Carthaginians used them against the Romans. So it's a long history of using elephants. Horses don't really like elephants much because elephants are much bigger, and elephants can move surprisingly quickly over a short distance, as fast as a horse in most cases. But at any rate, they're used sort of like a battering ram or a tank to move in and break up troops, troop movements, and that sort of thing. Well, by 1526, Babur comes down and he takes the city of Delhi. He has other conquests in northern India, where he takes over quite a bit of territory in the north part of India until he dies in 1530. Here is a depiction of a guy attacking an elephant. I think this is just making mad. It's kind of poking him in the nose. Elephants are quite powerful, and they have very thick skin, so it's difficult to kill an elephant. In fact, the Hellenistic rulers, the only way they found to kill them, of course they didn't have gunpowder, is they used a spear like that, but they had to get down below the elephant and send a spear up towards the heart. That was about the only way they could do it. If you shoot an arrow at them or stuff, it really doesn't have a lot of effect on them. So they have very thick skin. Now, the next ruler you want to talk about is Humayun. Humayun is the son of Babur. He lives from 1530 to 1556. Unfortunately, I guess, for him anyway, he was not like his father. He was not a good leader. He was not a good warrior. And after his father dies and he takes over, in fact, much of the territory that his father had gained in India was lost when he fled to Persia after being attacked. So the Safavids helped him to retake the territory his father had conquered and make sure he was sort of established there in India again, and helped him retake that territory. However, he dies very relatively young age. He dies not in battle, he dies not from any of those kinds of things, but he dies of a fall, fell down stairs because he was taking opium. He was addicted to opium, and he actually died when he fell down the stairs after taking opium. So this is the kind of ending he had, and it sort of highlights the sort of rule that he had. He was not a good ruler. He obviously had his mind on other things. Now, his son, however, was named Akbar. Akbar comes to power quite early because his father dies so young. And we see he is the son of Humayun, but he is much more like his grandfather than his father. He actually comes to power at the age of 14. And he turns out to be a very good leader, and in fact extends the empire beyond even what his grandfather had conquered. In fact, he creates the largest empire that India had seen in about 2,000 years. He was a quite tolerant ruler, even though he was Muslim. He married a Hindu woman, and he had Christian advisors, Jesuit missionaries who were there. And so we can see that he is much more tolerant, much more open to things, and this is going to affect his rule as well. He actually created a new religion, which is interesting, a sort of a blending, a mixing of Islam and Christianity and Hinduism. He called this the divine faith. In this religion, by the way, he said that his religion taught that the emperor was infallible. Well, he was the emperor. By the way, if you're going to start your own religion, that's not a bad thing to say to people, that your religion teaches is that you are always right. Makes it hard for the people to argue with you. He begins to use zamindars. These zamindars are non-Muslim people to be administrators in his government. This is a way to keep powerful families at bay. And these people would be very loyal to him. One of their jobs was to collect taxes. And the way they got their wages, instead of having something like the IRS where the government collects the taxes and then you have to take part of the taxes to pay them, what they did is if they collected the taxes and they guaranteed a portion to the government and then they kept the surplus. So it would be as if we had Citibank or Bank of America or some of these big banking companies collect taxes in the United States. They would guarantee the government a certain amount from, say, Florida, but they would collect more than what they gave the government, and that part would be their profit that they would keep. But you wouldn't have an IRS to pay for, I guess. Well, at any rate, in 1579, Akbar wins some favor with people by dropping a tax. This is called the jizya. This is the non-Muslim tax. Technically, this tax is a tax on non-Muslims because, according to Islam, you could not have a non-Muslim in the military. They couldn't serve in the army or the military. Since, say, a Christian couldn't serve in the Muslim military, they were exempt from that. They paid this fee, a sort of non-military service fee, a tax, that was to cover the fact that they were not allowed to serve in the military. Now, the next ruler we're going to talk about here is Shah Jahan, 1623 to 1657. He is a quite brutal ruler. He is remembered for a couple of things, I suppose. One is that beautiful building up there, the Taj Mahal. That's probably what he's most remembered for. But he's remembered also as being a brutal ruler. He assassinates his rivals. He sets up a new capital. He moves the capital from Agra to Delhi in 1648. But back in Agra, before he left, he built this building, the Taj Mahal. In fact, the Taj Mahal, one of the most famous buildings in the world today, is in fact a mausoleum, a place of burial, especially for his wife, pictured down here next to him. She died. Her name was Mumtaz Mahal. Mumtaz, by the way, in Arabic means excellent. But she died in childbirth, giving birth to their 13th child. And so Shah Jahan spent a lot of money, taxed people heavily to pay for this. She died at the age of 39. Reportedly, it took 20,000 masons 20 years to build this building. And it came at great cost. But to do that, he taxed the people who were quite poor, to build this sort of magnificent building to honor his wife. So these are some of the things he's remembered for: his brutality in coming to power, his brutal tactics with his own people that were, in many cases, hungry and so forth, was still charging them taxes to pay for the building of this spectacular building, which is probably why he is most remembered today for this building. Now, next we want to mention Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb, 1658 to 1707. Shah Jahan had several sons. Remember, his wife there gave birth to 13 children. And when Shah Jahan got sick, he had been a harsh man. His sons were ready to take over. However, they fought amongst themselves to see who would take over. The one that finally emerges, it's the toughest of the sons, and the one that's going to take over is Aurangzeb. The problem is by the time he defeats his brothers, his father had gotten well and wasn't ready to resign. This did not stop Aurangzeb. After he defeats his brother, he throws his father in prison and takes the throne in 1658. He, unlike Akbar, is a very strong Muslim. And what he wants to do is straighten up India, make it more Muslim, make it more devout and more strict. Now, on some hands, we may not agree, but on one of them, we might see the value in it, and that is the practice of sati, which he brings to an end. This was a Hindu practice where basically widows had no rights. Once their husband died, it was not allowed for them to remarry. And also, once the husband had died, the widow did not get the property of the husband. That went to the sons. So therefore, many sons saw their widowed mother as something that was costing them money, an expense. But it became the custom within India that a widow, a Hindu widow, would become so distraught that she would throw herself on the funeral pyre of her husband and I suppose grab him, embrace him, and then they would both die, or she would die and he was dead, and they would go into the eternity together. This is what she was supposed to do. Now, sometimes, of course, as you might expect, the widows did not do that. But then others would throw her on the funeral pyre. This is the practice of sati. This is something Aurangzeb brought to an end during his reign. He made it illegal for that practice. He also ended other illegal taxes, which he felt were illegal, and the practice of making men into eunuchs. He ended this practice as well, which had been a kind of common practice. So we'll see then that he does have the Mughal empires here under Aurangzeb. You can see the territory that they have, this sort of darker blue to the north, than the lighter blue that's here. This is under Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb. So they control most of this subcontinent and areas going back into Persia. That's the Mughal Empire. Now, Aurangzeb also wanted to, we might say he wanted law and order. According to, of course, Islam, you were prohibited from drinking alcohol. So he made a law saying no one can drink alcohol in his territory, in his kingdom. He also eliminated gambling because that was not allowed within Islam. And he tried to bring an end to not only gambling and drinking, but prostitution as well. He also prohibited the construction of new Hindu temples, and in fact would forcibly convert people, have forced conversions of people, forcing them to convert to Islam. Also within Islam, non-Muslims did not have a voice in the court system. They were not considered to be reliable witnesses, so he began to enforce that. All of this harsh practices, of course, was not met well. People did not accept it very well, and there was a lot of unrest, and in fact, even rebellion. And so to put down the rebellion, he centralized his government. Of course, this is what governments do if they want more control. They want centralized power. And this helped him try to bring an end to the rebellions. Now, the Mughals themselves are going to face a new challenge. This new challenge will come in the form of Western powers that begin to come to India. The Portuguese had been there. We mentioned them much earlier, say in the early 1500s, early 16th century. But the Portuguese were not interested in actually controlling the land, taking over India and controlling it, making it a colony or something like that. They mainly wanted to be there and have some secure harbors where they could conduct trade, where they could get supplies, and where they could sail on to other places. But they were not interested in taking over the whole countryside. The people that were interested came in the early 17th century. These are the English. In 1608, to the port city of Surat, they show up, and the English have ideas for what they would like to see coming out of India, and that is primarily they wanted cotton. They wanted lightweight cloth like they made in India, and they made it out of a plant called cotton. And of course, you're familiar with that. Of course, cotton will not grow in Europe. It won't grow in England. It needs a warm climate to grow, like in the southern part of the United States, Egypt, India. These become the primary places where cotton is obtained, especially by the British. And so to do that, they need to come in and control the land. They need to control the agriculture and make sure the cotton is planted. And of course, cotton is a crop that's very labor intensive. It's very labor intensive not only to plant it, but especially to pick it. You have to pull off those cotton balls. Each cotton ball has seeds in it, and it all has to be done by hand. They also began to build factories in India to help them sort of process the cotton. Well, as the British, the English rise in power in India, the Mughals begin to decline. And in 1639, the English establish a fort at a city called Madras, and this becomes a real base of their power. Eventually, we're going to see that the British will come to control India, the whole subcontinent eventually. By 1661, they established Fort William, now called Calcutta, and this becomes a major military base and trade base for them further north. What's interesting is that a lot of the control of India actually comes from a company, a British company, a British corporation, we might call it today, East India Company. It took over India. It controlled the processing, controlled the shipping and the goods, and it was a business for them. This, of course, there were others who tried to exert control in India. The Dutch and the French attempted to have control. But the British finally lay claim to the entire thing, especially after the 7 Years' War. They had pretty much eliminated the French out of the picture. And we think of the 7 Years' War here in the United States as the French and Indian War. But the French are defeated soundly by the British all the way around, certainly here in North America as well as in India, and they gain control. The East India Company will eventually, in 1858, turn over the entire control of India. They give it as a gift to the royal family in 1858. Queen Victoria, I believe, receives it, and it is called the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. It is one of their primary colony because it brought in so much wealth and had so many people, markets to buy their goods, and cotton and so forth to supply them. So here we see a map of India, the map of India, where we see Bombay over here, right, or Mumbai as it's called today. That's a British city. We see all this territory in the green. These were British territories they controlled. Calcutta You can see Madras, and eventually they will control the entire subcontinent. So as we think back about these Muslim empires, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals, and we've talked mostly about the Ottomans and the Mughals, but these three Muslim empires are sometimes called the gunpowder empires. Each of them is Muslim. Each of them had more modern weaponry than those people around them. They had guns, they had gunpowder, they had artillery. And the other thing they have in common is all three of them decline as the Europeans gain more and more territory. The decline of the gunpowder empires was caused, number one, certainly by the rise of Europe. Number two, some people have pointed to a change in the climate. There have been many times the climate has changed down through the centuries, and this was having an effect on these empires. And number three is maybe a little less tangible. That is, each of these empires had a sense of security. They had a technological advantage, and they believed that they were really somewhat untouchable by others. It sort of gave them, they sort of rested on that, and then the Europeans show up and they outmatch them on every point. Well, we'll leave this discussion here for now.